Hello, everybody. I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet, joined by Ken Weeb from Sportsnet. Together, we are Kenny and Renny, and this is the Kenny and Renny long form edition, heading into a real exciting time, we think, here in Winnipeg as the WHL playoffs are starting out. We got a great show for you here. We're going to be joined by Winnipeg Ice head coach James Patrick, and later in the show by John Chabot from Hockey Night in Canada in Cree. I think these two played against each other at various points of their career. Maybe there's some stories in there. We'll have to see. But we're not going to waste any time. Usually Ken and I kind of gab a little bit, but sometimes you get guests who are really well prepared. And James is so well prepared. He was here before the show started. You think this guy is, running, maybe one of the best, if not the best junior teams in the country or something like that. But James, great to have you here in the show. We're going to get to a bunch of the ice stuff because that's the exciting stuff that's happening. But we want to dig a little bit into your past like we usually do on this show. I'm guessing that you're a guy who has, since you've got a brother who played in the NHL, you had a long career in the NHL, you've got a nephew played in the NHL. There's a little bit of sporting bloodlines in the family. And I think it starts with your dad. Am I right that he played CFL football?
Yeah, he did play for the Bombers for 13 years, and in the glory days with Bud Grant and Kenny Plain and that era. So so that is it in the genes. I don't know. I think it's also just typical Canadian kids at the time, that our era. We grew up. Everyone was hockey crazy, and we skated on the outdoor rinks and. I don't, our next door neighbor was 2 years younger than me. His name was Bobby Joyce. Bobby also played in the NHL from Winnipeg and played in the Olympics in '88. So we lived on a street with about, 15, 16 houses, and 3 boys played in the NHL. And we used to play ball hockey at lunch and after, maybe right away after school before we went to the outdoor rinks after dinner. But a lot of the time, it would be Bobby in goal and me and my brother playing against each other. And who would have known? And we were, at the time we were 10, 11, 12 years old. So, we were, and if I go back to my parents and my dad, my dad gave us every opportunity to play sports. There were 7 kids in the family. My sisters all played high school sports, but certainly was not pushed. My dad was high on education. He really wanted both of us to go to U.S. colleges at the time. And my brother played for the Wheat Kings, and I ended up going to North Dakota.
Yeah, right on, James. What was it about hockey that drew you to the sport and that you kind of stuck with it, knowing that you were athletic and loved doing other things also?
I played other sports, which we did growing up. Played soccer, played baseball. I played football for a couple of years. I don't know. Hockey was the thing you did for 6, 7, 8 months a year. I do know this. I still have this memory in my back of my mind of in the old days when we had, I think we had CBC, CTV, and then we had 2 stations or 3, CKND, Channel 12, and Channel 4 and 8 from one was from Fargo and the other from Devil's Lake. Those were our TV channels in Winnipeg, but they used to show afternoon games, Saturday afternoon games, North Star games. And I was 6 or 7 years old. The Bruins were playing, and my dad told me that, Bobby Orr was the greatest player in the league and was going to be the greatest player. And from that second, I was a diehard Bobby Orr fan. So was half the city. We loved playing, and I just maybe having an older brother who was good. And I was all throughout our childhood, I was more under the radar, but he was my idol, my brother, but he also probably spurred me on to want to play, want to be the best I could. But I, as a young kid, when I was 6, 7, 8, I dreamed of playing the NHL. It was something I wanted. Was I the best? I wasn't the best player on my team. I wasn't the best player in Winnipeg. When I was 9, 10, 11, 12, maybe towards around 14, I started to become one of the best in the city. And yes, I was a good player, but I don't know. I just loved it. I loved it so much. It's all I wanted to do. When you got asked what you wanted to do when you grow up in school, I would never say a hockey player, but that's all I want. I thought it would would jinx myself if I said it out loud.
I know when you've got an athletic family and parent. I know some guys who've played pretty high levels of hockey, and you'd hear them tell those stories about how they wanted to hold on long enough so that their kids saw them play, so they'd have a memory of that. Do you have a memory of your dad playing football? Was there a pull to football because of that for you? And I guess to kind of tie three questions into one is what kind of pride existed in that your dad played for the local CFL team?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. My dad was the greatest dad in the world. My dad was a superstar to us and the kids around us in my neighborhood because he played for the Bombers. And I mean, when as I got older and knew what his personality and what he was, an incredible person. And I think he was an incredible Manitoban with what he achieved. Playing for the Bombers for 13 years, was an MLA for 16 years, was a member of the CRTC for 10 years, and had a successful business in Winnipeg for almost 60 years, a real estate and insurance business, and founding member of the Big Brothers Association, founding member of the Rotary Club. Did a lot of, humanitarian deeds as just when this city was coming into its own through the 50s and 60s. So I'm more proud now than I was before, but definitely, it was exciting to have had a father who played for the Bombers, and we were huge Bomber fans. He had season tickets till he passed away. We would try and go to Bomber games, and there were 7 kids, and my mom and dad would go to some of the games. But if we ever got to go, it was a big deal. And I mean, for the other 8 months we followed hockey, but during football season, we watched all the Bomber games. It was cool to meet, Kenny playing and his kids. I remember, Doug playing, and we'd go to their cabin or stop by for a day. And, Bud Grant came to the town, came to our house, or Herb Gray or Gordy Rowland. Some of those famous Bombers who played in that time was neat when we were 10 and 12 years old. I remember going to the Plains house. They lived on the Red River. When I was probably 12, 13 and going skiing, and Doug playing skiing on the the Red River, and Grant Ledyard was there. Grant was probably 13. I was 11. My brother was 13, and Doug playing was 12. And 3 of us ended up going to the NHL. So, it was, kind of how things work in circles, but definitely was excited and proud of my father growing up and huge Bomber fans.
James, how would you describe the decision-making process? And obviously you mentioned the importance of education to your parents, but how did you end up choosing UND, and what was it like to go through that experience where there again you played with guys who either became NHL players and coaches? A lot of them. It was a great environment to be around. But how did you decide to go there, and what did it mean to be able to have that experience of playing there in Grand Forks?
Yeah, it was. What led me there was I played Tier 2 in Prince Albert the year before. And at the time, Prince Albert was the, you could say, a powerhouse in Tier 2 hockey. They had won the Saskatchewan League like 9 out of 10 years of the previous 10 years. They had the best coach in junior hockey. I went to Notre Dame as a 16-year-old when it was just starting to develop. Played in the Air Canada Cup as a 15-year-old in Winnipeg, and Notre Dame was there. And my dad talked to the school and led me there. From Notre Dame, we had the best team in Canada, and a lot of the players were going to the Western Hockey League. The Calgary Hitmen, who moved from Winnipeg, I think the Winnipeg Monarchs eventually moved to Calgary. They owned my rights. And what had ended up happening, the NCAA changed a rule. You used to be able to play in the Western Hockey League and still go to U.S. college, and they changed the rule. And my brother was going to go to college, and he played in the Manitoba League at 15 and 16, and then Brandon was calling, and he decided to go to Brandon. In Brandon, he played with Brad and Kelly McCrimmon. Both of them played in Prince Albert before they went to the Wheat Kings. And I had to make a decision where I was going to go and play as a as a 17-year-old. Was I going to go to the Western Hockey League? My dad really wanted me to go to college, so then I had to play Tier 2 somewhere. And Brad McCrimmon, my brother, it somehow came up, but Brad McCrimmon phoned me. And he's a 19-year-old and I'm a 16-year-old kid, or he's maybe a 20-year-old. They just finished I think they had just lost in the Memorial Cup. And he said, you have to go to Prince Albert. If you're going to go and play Tier 2 anywhere, it's the best place to play. I ended up going to Prince Albert. We had a fantastic team. We won the Canadian Championship, but my teammate and the best player on our team was Dave Tippett. And we were both heavily recruited. And we had a number of choices of where to go. North Dakota recruited us hard, and so I made up my own mind, but I still remember one day Tipper said to me, "Hey, we're going to North Dakota. That's the best place. We have to go there." And I was leaning that way. My final two choices were North Dakota or Wisconsin, and both great programs. I don't know, for whatever reason, Gino Gasparini was a coach. John Marks was assistant. Dean Blaze, another assistant who had a great college coaching career. Don Boyd, who's been a longtime NHL scout. So those guys were assistant coaches, and I just connected with them. And it turned out to be, talk about, coaches. Dave Tippett had a great coaching career. From that team, Craig Ludwig played a long NHL career. Troy Murray had a long NHL career. Rick Zombo, another defenseman, played about 12 years in the NHL. Trying to think. Even Phil Sykes. Phil Sykes was our captain. Played for the Jets, but played about 10 years in LA. And then a lot of guys. Gord Shervin was a real good player. Played in bit in Edmonton. Played NHL games. I might be missing some. Kerry Eads and Phil Sykes were our captains. Both have coached hockey. Kerry's been a long time assistant coach in college, and now he coaches as a GM in the USHL, so in the US Junior League, sorry, I should say. But so I went to a school that I felt comfortable with the coaching staff. I made my decision probably in February. Later that year, I got drafted to the Rangers, but all I can say is about my time at North Dakota, it was two of the best years of my life. The hockey was unbelievable. The coaching was fantastic. Going to school and being in that environment was so fun. I'm so glad I got that opportunity. I think the world's changed a lot, but to go back and experience fraternity and sorority parties and football games and the tailgating that went on before, and Mark Chipman was one of the quarterbacks on the football team when I was there, and another Winnipeg connection. But I look back at it as, even all those years, the year I played in Prince Albert and then those 2 years in North Dakota, that maybe the best years of my life. And I tell our players, it doesn't get any better than this. You guys want to go to the NHL so badly and you want to get there so quick. It will never be as fun as it is right now, and you got to enjoy where you are.
That's good advice. I don't want to fast forward because there's a bunch of stuff I want to touch on your playing career. But I am fascinated by the idea that you're a college hockey player and now you coach in the WHL, because I know that college hockey, for all the reasons you just described, it's a strong culture pull. And I'm from the Lactabani area, just north of us is Pine Falls. So Billy Watson came out of that area, won the Hobie Baker, was at University of Minnesota Duluth. I was friends with his nieces, and so he stayed down in that area and very much became kind of a cultural icon in that area. So I know that kind of collegiate lifestyle can suck you in, and it's hard to leave it. And so I was interested coming into this interview how you ended up not going back and working in the U.S. college hockey system and coming back and working in the Canadian Hockey League.
Yeah, it's another name I could have mentioned is Billy Watson, who I played in Prince Albert with. Great teammate, and he played in the NHL from another guy from that team. And again, thinking of some of the guys, like you said, who become part of the community, Canadian kids who grew up and played in Penticton or played in St. Albert, Pete Lamoureux. The name might not sound familiar, but Pete played in St. Albert, had great Tier 2 teams there, went to North Dakota, married a North Dakota girl, fathered 7 kids. 2 of them, the 2 daughters were 2 of the best female hockey players in the world for about 10 years. I think 3 or 4 of his sons played. 3 of them played college hockey. 1 played in the Western Hockey League. I know his son, who was a goalie, played in the minors. Was on our farm team when I was coaching in Buffalo. One of his boys is a coach now in the U.S. Junior League. So, talk about being, going down there and staying and living and making roots, and that definitely does happen. I think for me, unfortunately or fortunately, I played 2 years there. Then Dave Tippin and I and Gord Shervin went from that team to the Olympic team. Played a year on the Olympic team, and then you were pro. And maybe because my pro career went for a long time, and I was lucky to play as long as I did, that I did lose touch a bit with North Dakota. Still have some great friends, and I'm still close. And half hour ago was talking to a financial guy who from North Dakota, who I got to know when I played down there. And so, and I consider Kerry Eads one of my closest friends. Still we are close. Dave Tippett as well, I'm still very close to. But for me, it just the way my career went, when I ended up going to or playing a long time in the NHL, at the end of my career, I went to Buffalo. I thought I was going for 1 year in Buffalo, and and then they brought me back for 1 more year, and then 1 more, and that 1 year turned into 6 years, and then 6 years turned into 8 years of coaching there. And when it was all said and done, I lived 15 years in Buffalo, and I never, I couldn't have dreamed of that happening when I went there for 1 year and thinking it was the last year of my career. And I think, my kids grew up there, and their best friends lived there. My one daughter went to university an hour outside of Buffalo, and both of them live in Canada now, but that was where my life headed. And that's, I guess, just the direction that hockey took me.
Right on, James. You're chosen 9th overall by the Rangers. Grant Fuhrer before you, Garth Butcher after you. Same year, Dale Howard-Chuck went number 1. What was it like to, I know times have changed and there's social media and everything else, and you obviously have a couple of guys that are going to be first rounders this year as well. What was it like to carry the pressure of being a first round pick? And, the second part of that, how does it help you in dealing with some of those young players, in their draft year when they're maybe nervous about what the central scouting rankings are or where they're rated and sort of things like that, where you can kind of get them back on track to stay focused on the task at hand rather than worried about where someone thinks they might end up going?
The only advice I can give in those areas are more from being around the game long enough to know that it means nothing. And I have told them, like I said, I want you to enjoy this year. I don't want you to think about the draft. I don't want you to think about where am I going to go. I got to play good because there's scouts in the stands. I said, no, I want you to play good because you want to be the best player you can be, and you want to help this team win. That stuff will take care of itself. As far as even the pressure of being drafted or the pressure of where you're going to go and the focus during your draft year, I can't help them in that area, because when the year I was drafted, the draft age dropped from 19 to 18. Till Christmas of my draft year, I didn't even know it was my draft year. Honestly, I'm playing on the Prince Albert Raiders, and I love hockey, and I'm trying to be the best player I can be. And I came home for Christmas, and a local coach here in Winnipeg, I went to the Winnipeg Arena to watch a junior game, and he told me I was rated in the first round. That was news to me, shocking news. It was exciting. Played the rest of the year, never heard anything. I don't know if any scouts saw me play or whatever. And after our season, probably in May sometime, I got Terry Simpson said a scout from Washington, and his name is David McNabb, wanted to talk to me. And David went on being a long-time scout, assistant GM, mostly in Anaheim, but he interviewed me for an hour. That was the only contact I had with any scout or any team. And I did not have an agent. And I'd been, two agents kind of started recruiting me. They phoned me, and on the day of the draft, I didn't go. The draft was on a Wednesday back then. It wasn't on a Saturday. It wasn't televised. It was at the Montreal Forum or in an office somewhere in the Montreal Forum. And that morning, I got a phone call from this agent who said I'd just been taken in the first round by the Rangers, and Craig Patrick would like to talk to me. And I talked to Craig for 5 minutes, and then I went to school. That was my experience of getting drafted. And so I would say there was no focus and no pressure at all. And I didn't have to go to a combine, and I didn't have to, and so things changed a lot since then. But I do know where the game has gone. And I do know from my draft, players drafted after me that are Hall of Famers now. I know players drafted before me who never lived up to expectations. And you see that every year. And it means nothing. I mean, Chris, my draft year, I played in Prince Albert. I was 17. Chris Chelios played in Moose Jaw. He was 19. I thought he was the best player in the league. And he played exactly like in Moose Jaw. He played exactly like he played in Montreal or in Chicago. I mean, he was tough. He could skate. He could do anything. He was hard to play against. They were our biggest rivalry. We beat them in Game 7 of the league finals. And it was tied after 2 periods. And I was our best defenseman. He was their best defenseman. But I thought he was a great player. He went 40th pick overall. He probably had the best career of any player maybe drafted in our draft. Did it matter where he went? Did it matter that he wasn't a first rounder? Not one bit. The cream will always rise to the top. So I think seeing that year after year after year, seeing every fan of every team sees where players drafted and see where players are rated, and then you see where they are 5 years later. And it's easy to second guess it. I do think it's harder than ever to be a scout now. I mean, and scouts want more information. They will turn over every stone. They want to talk to Geeky and Savoy. I mean, they would like to talk to them 5-6 times a year, and that's every team. There's 32 teams. It's impossible. And they're also obviously they're calling us. They call Matt Cockle, our GM. And so, yes, I get it. They want to get every ounce of information possible. And so the spotlight and the focus is on these kids way more. And we want to take it off of them, and we want to shelter them from that. And I just keep telling them, just be yourself. Go out and play. Go out and compete. Go out and have fun with your teammates. Be the best Winnipeg Ice player you can be. That takes care of itself.
So it sounds like when you're dealing with the star players, and you've got a bevy of them on your team, it sounds like the philosophy is just take care of business, and the rest will take care of itself. I love that kind of idea. I love that philosophy, but I also love drilling in with coaches on how they handle special players compared to, and I guess all players are special, but those ones that, the Savoys and the Geekies, the players that are standouts. Now, I've heard some coaches tell me that you need to kind of treat everyone the same as though it's a level playing field. And I've talked to a lot of really successful coaches that say that's absolutely ridiculous. You cannot do that. How does the philosophy work for you? Does it take a special approach with special players?
I think it's easier in our league than the NHL. I believe that from my experience in the NHL. And but I do think you have to communicate with every player. And you do communicate differently depending on the player once you get to know them. And I have some players that are really sensitive, and I talk to them, but I got to explain where I'm coming from, and I got to explain what I expect of them a little softer than I do with other players. And I think you learn that. But at the end of the day, they all have to be accountable. And for you to have the respect of everyone, you have to show accountability and expect accountability from them. And so I can even talk about those two players, like, Geeky and Savoy, and they're so different in personalities. Matt is really quiet, more soft-spoken. Connor Geeky is, the laid-back, cool kid who wants to be the center of attention and wants to, he wants to bring it, give it to me. And there's times I got to bring Connor back to earth. And then there's times I got to get Matt Savoy. Come on, Matt. Come on, let's go. Let's get moving out there. but at the same time, they both need to be taught. They both need to be corrected. They both need to be encouraged. They both need a pat in the back. Probably more so Geeky because, and I would say he's a little more up and down where Savoy is even keel. I don't favor either one of them, but I do probably talk a little differently at times to each of them. That's probably how I would describe it.
James, what about building a winning culture? Obviously, the years weren't always as smooth in Kootenay. Obviously, you have high prospects. You got guys that have come back. You got guys that have been surprises. How have you been able to build the winning culture? And then how do you sustain it? Because, I mean, it's hard enough to get there. And then to be able to keep that going, especially in a league where it can be cyclical. I mean, how have you been able to do that? And how do you get the buy-in for that to happen?
Okay, it's so important at our level. It's so important with our organization. So we started 5 years ago in Kootenay, and we were, you have a group of players and a group of draft picks that you're handed. And so when I say we, I'm talking about Matt Cockler, GM, Jake Heisinger, who I could describe him as director of player personnel or assistant GM, head scout, and myself. And so the three of us have been in this together. And when I got the job, the first thing I said, I'm going to go there and we're going to change the culture and we're going to do things this way. And you have all of your beliefs and how your expectations and how you want things done. And I'll tell you, number one, it doesn't happen overnight. I'll put it this way. I met with the players the day before training camp, and I told them what my expectations were and what things were going to be like moving forward and my rules. And I don't have a lot of rules, but there's also the way things are going to be and what you expect. But if I talk about my two rules, one of them is you're never late. You're always on time. There's no excuse for being late. And the other one, you're always representing, at that time was the Kootenay Ice. Now it's the Winnipeg Ice. Everything you do every day is you're representing the Winnipeg Ice. And then we'll expand on that as we move forward as a team. So training, the first on ice session the next day was at 9:00. And I'm in my sweats and my skates, and I'm walking down the hallway, and two veteran players are walking in at 10:50. This is the day after. And so as soon as I saw him, I just said, get home. I don't even want to see you. Go home, and then we'll decide, whether you're going to be even part of this team. So, I mean, that's where things started. And there was a tough go for a lot of reasons in Kootenay, and it was a franchise that a lot of players wouldn't come to when they were drafted. And so you had to, it just smaller market. And so I will say this, a lot of players didn't want to play there. Then you end up trading, you're getting players who are on their third team. And it is hard to develop culture but if you draft them at they're 14 turning 15, and now we get them at a development camp, and then we get them at a training camp, and Jake starts working with them throughout their year when they're 15, and then they're 16, and throughout those 2 years, if they don't play for us, they'll come and spend a week with us on the road, and they'll practice with us. Some will get into games. We get our hands on them, and we can influence them, and we can mentor them way sooner. So when I talk about moving from Cranbrook to Winnipeg, and a little been's mentioned about this, but our second year there, the first year I thought the team played as good as it could. We fought for a playoff spot. We literally, I think we missed out by about 5 points, but we were in it till the last week of the season. And we had a 16-year-old Peyton Krebs who was a special player and a special person, driven and competitive and skilled, and a rare combination. And so the next year when we came back, quite a few 19-year-olds, you always have your 3 20-year-olds. But there was a real, you could see a split. And we had some younger kids, and Peyton I've never met a 16-year-old kid who was more focused on sleep and diet and training and wanting to play and will do whatever it takes to win. And we had the 19 and 20-year-olds who were jealous, mad, thought he was a brown noser, a suck up. And these guys wanted to party, and they wanted to, they wanted everything handed to them instead of earned. and we started, I think our first 10 games, we were 4-6, but we, at one point we decided it's not going to work with this group of players, and all they're going to do is impede and hurt our younger players' development and hurt a young player like Peyton Krebs and where he wants to go with this team. And we ended up moving a lot of these players. I think we moved 2 of the 20-year-olds. We moved probably 5 19-year-olds. We went super young. We had to convince Owen Peterson, Mike Milne to leave their teams. They were 16 and they came and joined us 2 months into the season. And we knew we were going to take our lumps, but we decided from that day forward, we're moving. This is how the culture is going to be. And this is how you are going to compete. And this is how you're going to treat your teammates. And this is how you're going to, work with your coaches and the respect you're going to show. And this is how you're going to behave in the community. And it's one thing for us as a staff to say this and keep pushing on the players, but they have to own it, and they have to buy in and then own it. And it was so easy with Peyton because that's how he was. And the other kids his age, he was 17, all the other 17-year-olds, and then these 16-year-olds we had on the team, they just got right in line and followed behind him. And from that point on, so those 16-year-olds became 17, the 17-year-olds became 18. Well, now they're 20 years old on our team. And so when you get a hold of the young kids now at 15, and again, like the NHL, if you do a lot of research and you draft really good kids, good players, but also really good people, it just happens. I mean, it happens from the players on down, and it happens. So much stuff gets taken care of in the dressing room by them in a positive way, and how they we don't have. And I talk to the team. I don't want anyone using the word veteran, and I don't want anyone calling a kid a rookie. You might be an older player and he might be a younger player, but we're all the same and we're all one here. And I tell the story when Zdeno Chara got signed with Washington. After the first road game, he picked up his bag and he took it out to the, every NHL team, they have like a truck, that trucks all the equipment. And the trainer was going, "What are you doing?" "No, that's my job." And he goes, "No, I take my bag out to the truck." Well, all the other Washington guys saw that. From that point on, everyone in Washington was picking up the bag and just making life easier on the the training staff. Those little things, so I've told our team about that. I mean, the young guys all pack the bus and they have fun, but the old guys they're helping. They're getting their bags out there. They're picking up something else. They get all the stuff to the bus, and then our bus driver, and the young kids will maneuver it under the bus. And so that's part of the culture. But how do you get there? I guess that's our story.
Well done. That's great stuff. Daryl Sutter was asked a question earlier this season about his team. A reporter asked him what the similarities are between the Calgary Flames and his championship LA Kings teams. And he said none. And he just shut it down right away. I loved the answer because he was refusing to saddle this team with the expectations of past teams. I get that. But I also get why the question is asked, because there's people who are seeing something special in that Calgary Flames team. We clearly see something special in your group here. And I wonder for you, what kind of opportunity does coaching this team present?
Well, I will say this. I think Daryl might have also been sending a message to his team. We haven't earned anything yet to be compared to this team. That team won 2 Stanley Cups. We're nowhere near. I think that was part of his message too. This opportunity, for us as a coaching staff is I don't even look at it like that. I look at it like we have a chance to do something special, but we have such a long way to go. And I know there's high expectations, but all year long there was high expectations, and never once did we talk about finishing first. It's never been mentioned. We never talked about getting home ice in the playoffs. We never talked about winning the division. All we talked about was the process. All we focused on is the process to get there. And what is the process? It's coming to the rink every day, doing everything we can on an individual basis and a team basis to get better. It's taking care of ourselves off the ice. It's playing the game the right way, playing our system, playing the way we expect you to play on the compete side. That's the process. And that's all we've talked about all year long. And if we focus on that, again, the wins and the losses will be what they are at the end of the day. So that's what I look at as far as the expectations for us as a team. And, the coaches, I look at us as just being one part of it.
James, there's a ton. We haven't even scratched the surface. We're hoping, and we're coming to check you guys out tomorrow, doing a little bit of a pregame show. Hopefully we can get some people down there, realize what a special group that you are working with down there, and we get to watch. And hopefully this is going to go for a while, and we'll be able to have you on some more, because I got a whole bunch of stuff I wanted to ask you that we didn't even get to. But the one thing I got to say, I love this interview. It just beams through you how much you enjoy your job, like the smile on your face when you are talking about the process and the things that you do and the reactions that you get from the men that you're dealing with. It's truly fun to see, and it's no surprise seeing how much you love your job to see where you've got your boys right now. Best of luck going forward. Hopefully we'll see you tomorrow night, and hopefully we're in for a long spring for you.
Okay, well, thank you, and we'll take it one game at a time. Thanks, Ken. Thanks, John.
Appreciate it, James. Thanks again.
Okay.
Now we're going to bring in John Chabot right away after this. Actually, we never got to ask James about playing against John, because I'm sure there's probably some stories there. But we're going to bring John in now. John is the color analyst for Hockey Night in Canada in Cree, and I got to say, John, we've got some mutual co-workers. We were out with a couple of them last night. Jeff Johnson, just a phenomenal guy in this industry, and Doug Howe, my golf partner. If you ever get out with him, he's quite the golfer. But they've got nothing but great things.
Oh, he says, I'm not that good. I'm not that good. I said,
He's good. They rave about you, and rightfully so. I'm excited for this interview. We got a lot to get into. I want to just start right at the beginning, though, John, because you've lived a life of hockey and done so for a long time. How'd you fall in love with the game?
like most kids who have older brothers, I followed him in every sport he played. He started with lacrosse, soccer, baseball, hockey. He just gravitated towards both soccer and hockey, and I did the same. Summer times is filled with going outside and taking shots. He was a goalie, which is great for me. And so we go and take shots in the middle of summer, living wherever we live, Cold Lake, Alberta, Halifax, Nova Scotia, Shannon Park, North Bay. And our dad was in the forces, so we were all over. But one constant we always had was we would go take shots. And after dinner, 7 o'clock, still light out, want to take shots? Sure. He was always game. And so it gave me a target, gave me something to do. And then, I mean, as any boy will tell you, you're playing hockey, you're having fun. And I've always been that way. And I got your last bit of your interview with James Patrick. He's a great guy, great defenseman, great. He could skate this level here today, and at where he was in our league at the time. And I couldn't honestly say that about a lot of defensemen in our league back then. I mean, there was their top 4 that could, but James was such a fantastic skater. It always stood out in my mind just how smooth and how effortless it was for him to pivot and skate and accelerate and decelerate. He was fantastic. So he was above his time as far as skill level, but the smile he had when he was talking about hockey and the process and all that, I mean, and like everything else, we got to love it. And I loved it. And I always give, kudos to my older brother because he, every sport he played, I played, but I think I would have loved hockey anyways.
Yeah, James talked about the influence of his brother and how they chose a different path. I mean, what was it like to be pushed and have someone to kind of compete with, not just in hockey, but in other sports and things like that in terms of the family environment?
Oh, it was great. I mean, he never let me score. He never let me win. And like brothers doing, my wife at the time, we were still in high school, and my younger brother, who was 9 years, I was 7 years younger than my older brother, and I was 8 or 9 years older than my younger brother. And she would be in horror at how I would never let him win. I'd say, I mean, there's no way. And I have a funny story. My son used to come to the rink in New York, in Detroit, and Glenn Hanlon was our goalie. And Glenny was always great with Kyle and take him out in the dressing room. Kyle would shoot on him and he'd get his equipment on in the middle of the dress. Then they'd go out on the ice. And the guys always say, "Fly, let him score." He'd go, "Nope. When he scores on the great Glenn Hanlon, he's going to remember it." Kyle, but I was there that way too. My son, I would, even to this day, I mean, he's 35 now, and we play golf, and it's been a competition, and I never let the kid win. Unfortunately for him, and he got a lot of grief from his friends. You can't beat your dad in hockey, you can't beat your dad in golf, you can't beat your dad in something. Guys, my dad was a professional athlete. Your dad works in an office. A little bit different there.
I know how it feels. Ken never lets me win at golf either. And it gets frustrating at this point here. Talking about your dad being in the forces and moving around all over the place. I'm not an Army brat, but I've met enough before to know what it's like, and you're constantly tearing up roots. That's one thing. It's tough enough to go to a new place and meet new friends, kind of start your life over and over. But I wonder for you, to continually uproot yourself and move to a new hockey team and kind of have to prove yourself over and over again wherever you went. How did that challenge affect where you eventually got to? Because you got to where you wanted to go, but I can't imagine that moving around would have been easy in achieving that goal.
It was good and bad, because in one way you could never just be. You always had to prove, and that helped me through my whole career, every level, whether you're going from bantam to midget. There's guys a little year older than you, they don't want to give you anything. I mean, I go out in the rink when I was 8, 9, 10 years old. I mean, I played hockey in Cold Lake, Alberta, and we played outdoors until we were 12, because the indoor rink was for the travel team, which is the Pee Wee team. And so we left Cold Lake when I just turned 9, I think, 9 a bit, and I made the travel team. But unfortunately, we left before the season started, so they had to try out, and that's the first time I ever actually got a chance to play indoors. So I made the travel team, and we moved to Halifax, Nova Scotia, which was a cross-country trip. But in saying that, I mean, it was always a challenge, but not. And I'm a First Nations guy, and my dad used sport to make his life easier. Going to white high schools in Maniwaki, he always said that since he could play sports, he was always accepted, and that was the same with me. I could play. And so hockey was always a great equalizer, and basketball in high school. I never went out for teams, but it was known that I could play a sport, and it made my life easier. Was it easy as a kid? No. I mean, the unfortunate part of moving all over the place is that, like, my wife has friends she's had since she was 6, 7 years old, and I've never had a chance to do that, because I would make my great friends at 8, I'd be gone. I'd be great friends at 12, I'd be gone. I get great friends from 12 to 15, I was gone. So those lifelong friends, I still know these people, and I still see them on the street. We still have a great time and have a couple good laughs, but it's not that same bond. So if anything, that was by far the most difficult thing, was the bond you create as a kid. I never really got a chance to create that bond. But in hockey-wise, it helped, because I was always constantly having to show, trying out for the A team, or the B team, then the A team, then the double A team. And I always had to prove that I could play the level and above, and I was lucky enough to do that.
John, do you feel like that helped you on the way to the NHL also? That ability to adapt and kind of always having to try to impress someone? And then secondly, we always talk about the people and their path, and James mentioned it earlier. All these kids want to get to the NHL as soon as possible, but the part of the journey that often helps you get there is so important. And I'm just curious about that 1 year in Nova Scotia in the American League playing for John Brophy was like in that department, knowing that you were going to try to make it with one of the fabled original 6 teams that was kind of in a good stretch there.
It was in a good stretch, and that year in the minors with Brophy couldn't have prepared me better. And I think that is missing. It's just in the fabric of the sport right now. We have so many young players just going right to the NHL. The process to get there. I coached Major Junior also with Benoit Gru, and one of the big things we always try to do was talk about the process. We never talked about winning and losing. We talked about the everyday getting better, about controlling what you control, which is your work ethic, your approach to the game, your preparation for games. And you can't control if the other goalie stands on his head, but you can control how many shots you put on, all these things. So we talked that, and that process for me was invaluable. I mean, it went, like I said, proving from Pee Wee to Bantam, going from an A to a double A team, moving different times, always having to prove. And then going in junior, getting drafted in a hometown where I'm getting a lot of press, and then, guys taking issue. And, so dealing with that all the time was something that prepared me very well for my first year pro. And funny, I remember I got back then you don't really get cut. We just were kind of shunted to the side. you went, instead of practicing with the big team, for the most part, you were practicing with the American League team. So you knew that you weren't going to be on the team. So I was practicing with Nova Scotia, and I was talking to Brof, and I asked him at one point in time, you always, to know you made the team, they had to tell you to get an apartment, whether it be in the NHL or the AHL. And I'd been practicing in Montreal. We were still in Montreal all the time, and we were just going to Nova Scotia. And a couple of guys had got out to get apartments. So I said, Brof, I mean, can I get an apartment? He goes, I damn well hope so. More or less telling me that you're not going to be here long, but make the best out of it, which left a huge impression on me, saying that if you don't make this team, you're in trouble. And, you know, I got an apartment. My wife came down at the time. We had a child when we were 18. So we all moved down to Nova Scotia. It was my wife's first time away from home. She'd been born and raised in the Gatineau area. And so it was a huge move for them. I'd moved around quite a bit. We found a place in Spryfield, which is a 15-minute drive from the arena. But Brof he showed me what it was to be a pro, from the accountability to your play on and off the ice, the accountability to your teammates. And he didn't show it by verbalizing. He showed it by skating me every day for the first half of the year. If I didn't show up and play 60 minutes, the next day in practice, I skated the time he thought I didn't show up for. So I could have a great first period and play 6 great shifts, but miss 5. Those shifts are a minute each. Well, you're skating hard for 5 minutes on your own. Sometimes was way more than that. Sometimes was way less than that. But it was on average every game I was skating. And I asked him one day, you know, why? He goes, till you give me 60 minutes, you're going to be skating. It's flat, easy as that. And so I didn't get it. Thought I played well. Yeah, I get 3 points, but those 2 shifts in the second and third, you didn't show up. Get down and back. And I'd go down and back on my own, wait a sec, down and back. And so he'd skate me until he figured I was good. And then one day, just after Christmas, the practice was over. I stayed there, signed up. He just turned around, looked at me, just turned around and skated off the ice. Never skated again the rest of the year. Never did anything until the off season, until he took me into the weight room and almost tore my arms off when he got me to lift weights. But he didn't say, you got to do this. I need to show you what you got to do. And if you don't learn that way, then you're not going to learn. And, you know, funny story about John. I was in Detroit after that, and he was Broke stories abound. I mean, but he was my favorite coach because there was no gray. There was black and white. And either you worked hard and you committed to the team or you didn't. And he was the judge and jury. And he decided. And so, like I said, the first half of my year, I was getting bag skated every day. And whether we were playing the next night or not didn't even matter. Like, we had a bad morning skate and you bag skated me. That's just how he was. But he just made sure that there's a reason why you're in the minors. If you don't want to be here, then understand what it was. So I'm playing in Detroit, and I'm playing with Paul Kleeman Pro. Steve Eiserman's hurt, so they got to find somebody and pull the name out of that. Hey, Chabot, we'll put him in there. So but we had a great run. And so we're playing Detroit in the first round and lighting it up. I mean, a couple points a game. You know, Pro's toughest guy in the league. Peter's probably one of the most talented guys in the league. And I'm just kind of filling that center and just kind of, pulling, just holding onto the rope as they pull me. So after the first, so the morning skate comes. It's after our first 2 games in Detroit. We put up some pretty good numbers. And so I'm on the ice. It's kind of an awesome. I'm skating around, and Broke comes out behind the ice. I'm behind the bench, the glass. And he looks, and I can't go over and say hi. So he comes over behind the bench, and he sticks his finger like in the crack between the glass. And I reach up, and I kind of grab his finger to say hi. And he goes, come to my office. I say, Bro, I can't come to your office. It's the place. He goes, I'll come get. We'll sneak in the back. Nobody will see you. So I said, okay. So I sneak in the back. I go sit in his office. He's drinking coffee. I have a Coke or a water. I'm not sure. So we're laughing. He's telling stories. I said, I said, Bro, if I got to go, I'm going to miss the bus. So I run to the bus, get on the bus. Nobody knows, where the hell were you? Blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, yeah, I couldn't tell them where I was. So then I find out after the first period's over, I got a couple points. We were up 3 or 4-1. And Brophy comes in the room. He starts screaming at his team. He's going, you know, Brophy. I mean, he's unreal. But he's screaming and yelling, calling guys' names. He goes, that effing Probert, I can understand. I wouldn't hit him either because he would kick the crap out of you. But Chabot, clean up, break their wrists, take their hand. Like, so he's telling his players, the morning he's shaking my hand through the friggin'. And so and it was so typical, bro. It wasn't anything but winning the game any way he knew how. And if it meant breaking my wrist, then it meant breaking my wrist. And that just, it just crystallized why I loved him so much. It wasn't, he was just so black and white. He was just a great guy to be around.
You know, talking about legendary figures that you've stumbled across, I mean, you had your time with the Montreal Canadiens, the Pittsburgh Penguins. You already mentioned Steve Yzerman in Detroit, but I mean, those are three generational players, and I think beyond those, you know, those are intergenerational players. Essentially, what we're looking at there. I wanted to get your take on, you know, what made those three players different from each other, and what, you know, from someone who skated beside them and saw their daily habits. What made those players special?
Lafleur was at the end of his career, Guy, and he was the most what's the word I'm looking for? It was all natural. There was nothing you couldn't ask Flower to sit in the system. He just couldn't do it. His game was just about skating, passing, shooting. When he had the puck, he was phenomenal. And you know, he scored 30 some the year I played with him. He was you know, we had a good year. And I would say when he felt like playing, and it wasn't always, he was 32 at the time, at the down end of his career, he was phenomenal. He scored a goal that I will remember to this day against Hartford. He was going 100 miles an hour up the wing. The defense threw it off behind him. He doesn't break stride. It's in the air. He puts his stick behind him. He hits the puck off the boards behind him, steps around the D, and then comes up the other side, picks the puck up, comes in and just wires one over the shoulder. I think it was Greg Millen. And it was like, that's Lafleur. Like, it was unreal, but it was all natural talent with Flower. I mean, he was hard worker, but he just played the game the way he saw it. So my job as a centerman with him was just to make sure I filled in the holes defensively where he wasn't. And I knew that. I mean, I could pass the puck. I could, you know, I played with Steve Shutt sometimes, I played with Flower at other times, and you know, we were always changing who we were playing with. But it was, you know, for majority of that season, I was with Guy, and I just learned. Mike McPhee was with us at times, and that our job in my zone was to play defense as a center and as a right winger, because I never knew where he was going to be. But once he got the puck, he was, when he wanted to, he was still magic. So he was natural. With Mario, it was all in his head. He thought the game differently than everybody. People thought he was floating, and he wasn't. He just game was played in his head at a different speed and a different way that it was played in other players' heads. So he could look like he was just kind of looking out there. All of a sudden, he was in the gap and he was picking off a pass. I'm looking at his first goal in the NHL with against Boston and Ray Bourque. I mean, Bourque thinks he's got time. All of a sudden, he's there, panic, throws the puck, sticks there, breakaway goal. He did that all the time. He had that ability to understand the play and where it was going. And I always say that Mario is the best individual hockey player who ever played the game. He could get 150 points playing with me, you know, playing with the guys he played with. Some of the guys he played with weren't very good players, and he still had 150 points. It's, you know, we got the Kevin Stevens and the guys that the level that Gretzky was playing with. Then they became Stanley Cup teams. But he thought the game, and individually, he was for me the best individual player that he could get 150 points playing with a tomato can and John Chabot. I mean, he was good. So and Steve Yzerman was all about work. Stevie was the hardest worker. He made himself. I mean, he came out of junior hockey. He was a first round pick. He was a two-way guy. When he got to Detroit, Jacques Demers came in and wanted him to be offense. So he just changed his game to all offense. And Stevie, when he finished his career, he went back to being the player that he came out of junior, being a two-way guy, playing hard in his own zone. But during those middle years, I mean, he was in the gym. He was working hard. He was the hardest worker on the ice in every practice, playing a lot of minutes, putting up a lot of points, but he deserved it because of the work he put in. Stevie, I mean, here's a story about Stevie, and I'm sure you've seen this. We're playing at Buffalo, and one of their guys, Proby runs their goalie, which he did very often. And then so their tough guy, Kevin McGuire, runs Greg Steffen. Greg Steffen, by no slouch, he can throw him as well as any goalie who ever lived. So he gets up and starts blocking, you know, the guy, and then Proby's on the ice and just going berserk trying to find and get at McGuire. And both refs are on Proby. So they've got McGuire's kind of tied up, and Proby tries to get it, can't get in. So Stevie, of all people, jumps onto McGuire and takes an absolute beating. But that was just who he was. I mean, he was a hard-working guy, a team guy. And so those three guys, their games were completely different, but they were all the same in that they pulled the team in the direction they wanted to go in their own way. And Stevie was all hard work, all heart. Murray was all in his head, and Flower was all just natural, instinctive talent. And man, he's one of the Fleur is one of the all-timers on off the ice. We came in as young guys playing with him, and we had funny stories about Flower, about coming out with the young guys. The older guys were kind of intimidated by him, so we'd invite him out for dinner and he'd always say no. And we'd say, come on. And so he'd always come. We'd go out for dinner, and no matter where, he'd say, guys, I'm gonna be crippling your style. There's gonna be people around me, and we'd say, Flower, we don't care. So it'd be me, Alfie Turcotte, Greg Pozlowski, Kent Carlson, and we were inviting him out all the time. He would sit around and he would have dinner. We'd have a bottle of wine, and invariably Flower. And we just not why we brought him up, but he'd buy our dinner, and we'd say, let's go have a couple drinks, and we'd go. He'd always say the same thing. I'm gonna cry. We said, we don't care. We want you around, and we're allowed to ask him one question every meal. We'd sit around together as a group. We'd say, okay, what are we gonna ask Flower today? Question. He would answer truthfully, no matter what the question was. It was a truthful answer. And so then in the playoffs came, we were allowed to ask him 2 questions. So we'd sit around after game, our dinner, we were allowed to ask. So we'd sit down before, what are we going to ask him today? But he was all timer. He was what the Montreal Canadiens were all about. Looking after the young guys, knowing that his career was winding down, letting us know what he thought it took to be a professional player. Montreal prepared me out phenomenally for the NHL. They were a model organization in preparing the young players who they thought would be in the league for a while, and how to pull them in the Montreal Canadiens direction. And I couldn't ask a better team to open up with. And it didn't last long, but I did learn quite a bit.
John, you played 508 NHL games, another 33 in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Curious about the decision-making process to go overseas and extend your career, and what that part of it was like for you. I mean, we always talk about people choosing why they do things when. How about that part of it for you, and how did that prepare you maybe for becoming a coach down the road as you did?
It was a natural progression. My wife and I had always talked about going overseas, and at that point in time, hockey had started to become more of not saying a chance stroke, but more of a job where you go into the rink was you never knew when you're a top 5 guy, 6 guy, you never have to worry about your spot, never have to worry about your sweater hanging up in your stall. When you're, and I was in both. I was top 6 sometimes, I was middle 6 sometimes, and I was bottom 6. I was all 3. And so as a bottom 6 guy, every day you're coming to the rink, whether you're at a game, and they never tell you you're playing or you're not playing. You came to the rink, you ate with the guys, you prepared, you had your nap, you got to the rink at 5 o'clock, 4:30, 5 o'clock. And if your sweater's not hanging up, then you're not playing. And then you jump on the bike and you ride the bike, you go for a run, you get ready for the next day. And so those were no fun. And, I was 29 at the time, and I'd heard that if you wanted to go to Europe and you want to get paid accordingly, then you had to do it before you were 30. And I had another year on my contract in Detroit, and went to Brian Murray and just said, listen, Brian and I didn't really see eye to eye. He wanted a certain type player. He liked the way I played, but he said he had players that filled the role that I filled. He had Keith Primo as a first-round pick coming up. They were paying Jimmy Carson a lot of money. He told me you had to play him. They had Sergei Fedorov and Steve Eisner. Like, where the hell am I going to fit in there? So, I just asked, can you let me out of my contract? Buy me out small, whatever, and we'll go to Europe. And so he said, if I buy you out, you got to promise to go to Europe. I said, you have my promise. It was time to go for me. So we went to Europe, and it was awesome. It gave me back the love of the sport. And it was, if you played Friday and Sunday in Italy, in Milan, Italy. So I was close to 45 minutes from Switzerland, 45 minutes from, the mountains. I would, season was over. We'd jump on the train on a Friday afternoon, take the kids out of school, and just pick a name on the train station. That's where we're going this weekend. And we just traveled. And so Italy was phenomenal. And it wasn't about hockey at that point in time, even though I was still I went back to the Olympic team, and I got close to playing the Olympics. I broke my arm, so I got cut, and it was still about hockey, but it wasn't anymore. It was about everything else. And that's what Europe gave you. For 11 years that I was there, hockey took precedence while you were at the rink and when you played your games. Besides that, it was about family. And they were very good, Europeans, at treating hockey that way as a sport. And, even soccer, it's their football for them, but it's their hockey. And they're professional soccer players. When they're away from training, it was family time. And we were lucky, and we had 11 great years, a year and a half in Milan and 4.5 years in Berlin, and then 4 in Frankfurt, and another half year back in Berlin at the end. And I don't know if it prepared me for coaching, because I never thought I would coach. So that came when I came back here to North America, and Charlie Henry, out of the blue, just called me at Christmas 6 months after I'd retired and said, "Do you want to coach my team?" And I went, "Charlie, I've never coached before." Because yeah, I saw you coaching last summer at the Indigenous team. You were coaching. You knew what you were doing. So I just said, if you put me with a guy who wants to coach, I will figure out if I like it or not. And so he said, sure. And that was the start of my coaching career. And thank God to Charlie Henry. I mean, him and I have remained very good friends. I saw him a little while ago. His daughter brought him over to the house after one of our COVID breaks. And I hadn't been for Charlie, I don't know if I would have coached. And I enjoyed coaching, but I wasn't passionate about it. So sooner or later, when you're not passionate about something, as you guys know, you kind of find something that you are passionate about. And that's what I'm doing now.
I want to go back quickly to your time in Europe. A friend of mine by the name of Wabagisha Grice, who I worked with at CBC Manitoba, is a phenomenal Indigenous author now, wrote the book Moon of the Crusted Snow. It's a phenomenal, great read. I'd say this because the audience is probably going to remember him from his time at CBC Manitoba. When he was a young man, I think it was a student exchange program, he went on to Germany. And he told me some fascinating stories about how his culture was, represented there, and that there was maybe a little bit of a disconnect between what, German people thought First Nations people were compared to what he came along and the reality of it was. I wonder if you had any of those moments over there where you talked about being a First Nations guy, if, your First Nations culture showing that off to Europeans and how that was accepted.
It was very much accepted, but as Wob says, they're kind of seeing it different than the reality of what it was. In Italy, I had a fan club called the Rebel Indians. I think it was the Rebel Indians, or Redskins, the Pale Rosso. So something Redskin, but they didn't take that as derogatory. They thought that was a thing of honor, and so they had like 300 people in this fan club. And then I went to Berlin the next year, and my brother came to visit. My brother had the long braided hair, looked very much First Nations, more than I did. And we took him to Dusseldorf on the road, and the team assigned somebody to take care of him while I was getting ready for the game. And so we're in Dusseldorf, and this young lady's from Dusseldorf, and she's saying to my brother, she goes, "So, you live in a teepee?" He goes, "No, I live in a house." She goes, "You sure you don't live in a teepee?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure I live in a house." She goes, "Well, I thought you lived in a teepee." She goes, No. She goes, "Well, you ride a horse, though." She goes, No, I drive a car." She goes, "You don't ride a horse bareback." She goes, so this is what she represented for what she saw on TV. So he's going, "No." So finally she was so insistent that he went, yeah, I just forgot I do live in a teepee and I do ride a horse." She goes, "Okay, good." I was happy. And so then I'd go to games, and all of a sudden in the stands I'd hear, and I'd be looking around like I'd be pissed. And at the end of the game, some guy would come down, and I'd say my teammates would be pissed because I was pissed. So they'd be trying to get in the stands and look for this guy. And I'd come out, and some guy'd come down. "Do you hear that?" And I say, "Hear what?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "That was you?" He goes, "Yeah." "Did you like it?" So he thought it was a thing of honor. Like he was doing it for me because he wanted to feel comfortable, And so the disconnect was that. I mean, they saw what they saw on TV, and there was a museum in Berlin that I went to. It held the Pergamon, which is the biggest artifact museum outside of Turkey and Greece. And it literally had a town that they had taken away over the years and built in a museum. It was an absolutely fantastic museum. But in saying that, they stole a town. And they did the same with a lot of Indigenous artifacts, where the guy took me in the back after, and he said, "Here's all." And I looked in, and there was totem poles and carvings that they belonged. And he said he understood that what had happened in the past was wrong, and they were in the process of shipping the totems back to Hawaii. But it was the biggest collection of First Nations artifacts, Indigenous artifacts I had ever seen in my life. But he understood that, that it maybe hadn't been the right thing to do, but also, I mean, you go back to what Wob was saying, that there was a disconnect in what people perceived us to be and what the actuality what really was.
John, kind of on that front, I mean, talk about inclusion and making hockey a better place. I mean, what are the most important parts of the education process to kind of achieve some of those goals and to help educate people on some of those other things?
I think it's the will. I mean, everything, I think, from racism to the problems we have, is misinformation, and it's not understanding, it's ignorance. And I think if you want to learn about something, and this whole last 2 years, the pandemic kind of plays right into that. I mean, if you really want to know something, you can find out. If you really don't want to know, then you don't have to. I had a teammate I played in Frankfurt, and I was the captain of the team, and I did a lot of things to help you guys coming in. I learned a lot of good things from my different captains over the years. And he came up to me one day and he says, "John," he says, you're not what I thought an Indian was." And I looked, I said, "Oh, what do you think an Indian was, Doug?" And he goes, "Your dad's racist, right?" He goes, "Yep." And I went, "There you go." I mean, it's all about ignorance. It was about what he was raised to understand a First Nations person to be, what a First Nations person actually was. And this is something that I think education on is the easiest way out. I mean, Wab Canoe said it best in saying that education is the new buffalo. And it is. I mean, for us, the more we're educated as a people, makes it easier for us to move forward. The more people are educated on the actual history of North America, the easier it is for, as a community, if we're willing to or want to move forward. And I think that the conversations, the uncomfortable conversations that have to happen aren't going to, if that's what you want to understand and learn, then they, and believe me, not all Indigenous people know exactly what happened either. I mean, we were, a lot of it's been buried. Like my generation, for me, I understand my community and my people, but I don't understand it to the extent of a person who was taken away to residential school and taken, told they couldn't do, and so, I mean, there's different levels of understanding, but ignorance, but there's always the education part. And if people want to get educated and they want to listen to an uncomfortable story, then I think that there's always going to be a good possibility. And don't get me wrong, racism is always going to be out there. I mean, no, I don't care. It's just unfortunately a fact of life. We can educate as much as we want. People are going to believe what they want to believe, and that's human nature. But for me, the people that want, if they want to, they want to move forward, then this is, educate yourself. And people have said that. The information's out there. It's up to you to go find out what it is and have that conversation with a person who's willing to have it with you, and a minority, whether they be, African Canadian, African American, from Asian descent or Indigenous. I mean, just most people I know are willing to try and help and move that needle forward.
John, what has it been like for you to work on a broadcast that is connecting with First Nations people in their own language? The Hockey Night in Canada in Cree broadcasts. What's that been like for you? What are some of the stories that you walk away from and maybe just give you like a positivity that maybe you didn't know was possible?
Yeah, I mean, the first one we did under Doug, probably 4 years ago, and I was just out of the blue. He just called me, and I'd worked with Doug for APTN in their Olympic coverage for the Vancouver Olympics, and I did both men and women. So we had a passing understanding and a relationship that we kind of every now and then out of the blue, either him or I would send an email, and then he just emailed and said, "Would you be interested in doing this broadcast?" And I said, "Yeah, for sure." And not understanding at the time what kind of where they wanted to go, and he wasn't sure at that time either. And then we got there, and it was huge in the fact that it was groundbreaking in a way that had been done but hadn't been done. And the texts and emails and the conversations and responses we get now is about my dad is, or my mom is 86 and then never in her life thought she'd hear her language during a hockey game on national TV. The pride that they have, they said they'd rather watch it if they could, every game in their own language. And that's kind of that's what we get. I listen to, I don't speak my tongue, and I wish I could. One of the things that my mom and dad were supposed to do was my dad was supposed to teach us Algonquin. My mom was going to teach us French, and I speak French. My mom taught us French. My dad traveled and worked, and he didn't have the same time as my mom did, unfortunately. But I listened to the guys, my other announcers, my colleagues, and the way they sit down, especially in the beginning, they try and decipher what every meaning in hockey meant to put it into Cree. And they have a thing now where they have a word that's anywhere from 10 to 15 letters long that will be for goaltending or for, a word in English. So our language in general, whether it be Cree, Algonquin, Mi'kmaq, they're descriptive. They don't really have a word for a lot of things. So when you're saying goaltender, you're literally saying the one who blocks the door, because there's no translation for goaltender, and that's the word that has to come out in goaltender. And, and so puck, it's not puck because there's no puck. It's the black thing they're trying to hit, and this is what our announcer has to say during the telecast. So it's not. So that for me was astounding that they were able to take words that had never been and translate them into words that are, and not words so much as phrases. And it's been phenomenal. I used to listen to my dad and my grandmother speak, and they would go on in Algonquin. I would just sit there and stare at them and listen to them, and all of a sudden you hear an English word because there was no translation. I said, "Wow, that's weird," but I understand why now, because it wasn't in their lexicon. And back as a kid, you just kind of hear and you don't really understand, but now I do. And Clarence and Jason and Earl, I mean, they do a fantastic job in presenting, Cree in a very positive way. And for me, I'm, again, like most of my hockey career, I'm just a hanger on being pulled forward. But these guys do a great job, and the effect it has on the communities. I think that there's been talk about doing it in other languages, and that would be phenomenal. I did some of the Olympic games in Inuktitut, which was great, and I would like to see at some point in time, if it could happen, to have Algonquin and maybe some variety of other language presented. And I know that's a huge ask, but it would be an interesting ask to have, because Cree is spoken across the north of our provinces, but Algonquin and Ojibwe and Mi'kmaq are spoken very much in the eastern part of our country, and other languages on the west. So it'd be interesting to be able to present them at different times.
Ken, did you?
No, I'm good. That was excellent, John.
John, just before we let you go, I did want to ask about this. It's probably obvious, right? When you're able to hear something delivered in your own language and you're not used to that, it's got to open doors. But I'm interested in what you think that can be accomplished through this. What doors this open? What accessibility this creates for communities, and the connections that it makes to deepen the connection between communities with Indigenous languages and the sport of hockey.
Yeah, I mean, for Hockey Night Canada, it just opens up another opportunity to have their sports scene in another area. And APTN has watched quite a bit, especially, like I do most of my work now through a charity called First Assist that I started a number of years ago. And I do most of my stuff in flying communities in Northern Canada. So APTN is the channel of choice for most of these communities. And so to have hockey on those channels and have it portrayed in their language, earlier on we talked about pushing the needle forward as far as the ratio between white and Indigenous, and I think one of them is to have the kids feel comfortable and listened to. The founding of the grave sites has been a known thing in Indigenous circles for a long time, and we bring it out and we weren't believed, and now we're being believed, and I think this is another way to bring our kids, it brings credibility to the history, the language, the culture of what we are. And unfortunately, a lot of times it's through this medium of either TV or movies that they be able to see and hear and understand something that they normally don't do. For our elders, it's the disbelief of having it presented on a national station. For the youth, it's the ability to say, "Oh, I can speak Cree." Now it's becoming much more accepted, and we're being listened to and being accepted for who we are. And I think that for us, presenting it in an Indigenous tongue, that is what we are trying to accomplish. Is that, it's still hockey, it's still a sport, but it's also makes it more acceptable to us as people to be able to live in a country that we've been in for hundreds, not thousands of years. And unfortunately, the way things have gone over the last couple hundred, we have been shunted to the side and made to feel like second-class citizens. So this gives us that opportunity to realize that what we have believed and talked, the way we've talked and understood to be, it brings it out a bit more and gives it maybe, hopefully, a little more pride in self, and helps these kids move forward with what they feel. They see me speaking, they see Earl. There's an opportunity for them now that maybe in 10 years when they're out of school, they can become that announcer on TV And it just doesn't have to be hockey. It can be through a bunch of different mediums. This is hopefully just a door opener for a lot of communities in the north and across the southern part of our country.
Last one for me, John. And I wonder, I'm assuming that there's, the time you spent in the game, there's probably a lot of thought that you've put into the idea of, how you were able to make it. And, players like Jonathan Chichu who come in and have great success. But I take a look, I grew up in this area, and when you would play First Nations teams, they were so much fun to play against, and they were ferocious, and they were good hockey players in communities like Pegwis and Saugeen, and I can name players that Manitoba people may pick up on. I remember Mike Spence was a phenomenal hockey player. Reynold Manias, I played AAA hockey with. Lloyd and Darcy Pelche. Ken will have played with Darcy Pelche, Junior A hockey. Corey Corshane, a guy out of Saugeen. Phenomenal hockey players. I knew so many First Nations players who stood out to me. And the only thing I can think of when I think of all those great players is that there's way too many really good First Nation players I know to not be that not enough of them are getting through and getting to the NHL. And I wonder for you, I guess it's different for you because you were an Army brat, you moved around, you weren't on, a single First Nation, but I wonder for you what the disconnect is that still exists there that we have to get through so that all these phenomenal hockey players that kicked my butt around the ice for all these years get the due that they deserve.
And it goes, and it's they talk about institutional racism, and that's what that is. I mean, you look at, there's been issues of kids being homesick. You have to understand that most of these kids in the north and communities, and my community has changed a bit, but you could walk down the street, and if somebody's having dinner, you could join them for dinner. You didn't have to just knock and walk in. The doors were unlocked, car doors were unlocked, and that's changed a bit with in issues, especially in the south. In the north, it's still like that. So when these kids leave these communities to bigger towns or cities, it's a complete, it's a foreign country a lot of times. And so they miss home, and a lot of them go home and they make up an excuse, they don't come back. And so that holds back a lot of people from making that step of investment in these kids. And it's changing now. One thing about hockey, as you guys know, they're trying to find the best players anywhere to play major junior now, but the NHL and pro hockey, and they're going to go anywhere to find them. And so that's kind of made it easier for Indigenous kids to find a home to play. But back in my day, it was different. It was, kid went home. I had a couple kids that came to my training camp in Hull when I was there. They were just as good as I was, and a couple kids when I was playing Pee Wee and Bantam that were head and shoulders above me, and they just had a tough time leaving their communities because it was such a foreign country to them to have to go and live. And that's the thing is, you look at, George Tutu is an anomaly because he had to leave home at 13 to go live down south to play hockey in not only a different house, but a different culture and a different way of life. And he might as well have been moving to Sweden or to Ukraine or to, any of those countries that had hockey teams because the language was different. Everything was different. And I think that's institutional racism that is kind of, people have an idea of what Indigenous people are about. And they don't, and unfortunately, you don't get an understanding of where these kids are coming from. And I think it's changing. I think we see, and I had this conversation with Brandon Montour yesterday. More and more, the NHL, Indigenous NHL player is a skill guy. In my game, in my time, a lot of times they were tough guys because they were raised on fighting. They left their communities. They had to be tough because they had to survive. And they made their way that way. They could play the game, yes, but they were tough as nails. And these guys today, they can skill and skate as well as anybody. And I think that's the change that's coming, that you're going to see now more and more these prep schools coming up, and they're going to find Indigenous kids because they're, as much as we say the door is opening a bit, it's opening a bit more for athletes because with the conversation in our country, the way it's gone, people are feeling guilty about how things went. And we'll take that guilt as long as you give us an opportunity. And we're going to try and use and leverage that into a way that we can move forward. And one of these ways is sport. If you want to go to northern Manitoba and find a kid because it makes you feel good and you're going to give them an education and a place to play and you're going to make them feel comfortable, then we're going to take it. And if that's what the price of your guilt is, then we're going to take that if we can move forward. And, you look at Brady Keeper, and Brady, he almost didn't make it because he was so homesick. He wanted to go home. And if it hadn't been for Alfie Michaud, who's from just north he's from Selkirk First Nation, just north of Winnipeg, who was the assistant coach in UMaine. I don't think Brady would have stayed. And he went beyond what an assistant coach does to make sure that Brady would stay. They brought his girlfriend in. They put her in school. They did as much as they could to make him stay and play. And it worked because 2 years later, he signed an NHL contract. But it hadn't been for Alfie and the people that surrounded Alfie, his family, and people, Brady would have gone home. And, at one point in time, we had, Jordan call him, Brian Trottier call him, Cody McCormick call him. I called him just to say, and I talked to Brady before because he was on the TV show that I worked on called Hit the Ice that brought Indigenous kids together a couple years in Winnipeg, a couple years on. But Brady was part of that. And we had brought him to Gatineau to play as tryout, major junior. He'd made the team, but he said, nope, I'm going home. So next year he went somewhere else. Made the team, nope, I'm going home. So they had Alfie as a coach that had to figure out how to keep him here. And this is the kind of the process because these kids come from a very social, as many problems that you do have in a community. It's very forgiving and very understanding and very open and very encompassing. And they go into a white community that's not that way at all. And, it's changing and we're moving forward. We want to be able to combine. That's one of the things that we do is we're going to combine what we have in our communities for what is out there for them. And we got to try to find a way to make the two fit. And, Brady's going to have a fantastic pro career as are the other kids in the NHL right now. But we are moving forward. You can see that. There's a lot of kids that have been drafted major junior that are playing major junior that have been drafted in the NHL. And we'll have our fair share. We always average around 10, whether it be 8 1 year and 12 or 7 and 13 or we always have around 10 in the NHL, and I think that number will get a little bit higher every year.
Yeah, let's hope, and it should. And I think this is happening in large part because people like you, John, are leading the way. I got to say, I've got all the respect in the world for Jeff Johnson and Doug Howe. They rave about you and everything they sold you as you were that and more. It's been a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much for sharing yourself with us.
Well, thanks for lying, Jeff and Doug, and I'll see you guys in the weekend.
Right on.
Thanks,
Thank
John.
you so
Appreciate
much,
it.
John.
Awesome.
Enjoy.
Thanks for having me.
Anytime. Thank you. Bye, John. Phenomenal stuff.
Yeah,
What do you
absolutely.
think?
Oh, great. John, great guy, great storytelling ability. And yeah, I love what he's doing. I mean, such great passion for the game. And again, you love to hear those stories about encouraging people like Brady Keeper. I mean, you mentioned, I played my third year in Winkler. We traded for Darcy Pelche at the deadline. He was one of the best players in the Manitoba Junior Hockey League. Had one of the best shots I'd ever seen. He was the first person that I saw. He would cut off the end of his blade to make it firmer. These are the days before the 90 flex. These were wooden sticks. He would cut the blade shorter so that he could shoot harder. He's one of the biggest, strongest guys I have ever seen. You couldn't knock him off the puck, and just a great human being. And he fit in really well with our group. That year we lost in the MJHL final to the Winnipeg South Blues, but it was great to play with him, and it was great to get to know him because previously he was just that big, strong guy on the Southeast Blades that you didn't know anything about. So I really enjoyed that experience of playing with him.
I played senior hockey against him, and there was one time he was coming through the middle. And listen, this was a guy who terrorized you on the ice, but I was playing defense, and he came across the middle of the ice one time, and he had his head down. And I thought, here's my chance to try to terrorize him for all the terrorizing he'd done. And he didn't see me coming. And there's a video on the internet. It's an NFL player who's running and takes a hit and doesn't see it coming, and he barely moves, and the guy just bounces off him. And it just is, this guy is so big and strong that he doesn't even see the contact coming, and the guy who sees it and initiates it is the guy who takes the worst of it. It was definitely a situation like that
I've seen that movie before for opponents, so I can imagine what it looked like for you. Even though I know you're strong in your skates, but John was tremendous.
Yeah.
And just a quick one about James. I mean, outstanding stories from James Patrick. I mean, again, I know we could have probably gone the whole an hour straight with James. He's a passionate individual. I mean, he was on Winnipeg Sports Talk with Hustler this week and heard a lot about his story there. And man, there's no surprise why the Ice are doing well. I mean, obviously, he talked about everyone buying into the culture, but there's very little doubt that James is doing his part to lead the winning culture, and he's done a phenomenal job there. And it's going to be great to be at the arena on Friday for that opening round matchup. I know there's a bunch of award winners. The WHL, the Ice are well represented. We'll get into that a little bit more tomorrow when we do our 1 hour pregame show from 5 to 6 here on our YouTube channel to tee up. We've got a great cast of characters. Jake Heisinger, who James mentioned, will be joining us from around 5:15 or 5:20 to 5:30. We got Sam Cosentino, our Sportsnet colleague, right out of the gate to help tee up the series, and then Peter Labardius, one of my close friends and also Sportsnet colleague, will join us from 5:30 to 6 as we get the folks ready for the Winnipeg Ice and PA Raiders in that first round matchup. But yeah, just tremendous for both gentlemen to invest their time with us, and some great storytelling. And man, what a small world. And the one thing we couldn't get into with James, that year on the Canadian Olympic team,
I know.
Great Manitoba connections with Kerry Wilson and Von Karpen were on the team, and also Manitoba Moose head coach Mark Morrison was also on that team.
Yeah.
So
we're gonna be. I can tell you this right now. We're going to be talking to James again at some point because there's a bunch of stuff I wanted to get in with him. A couple of things just on him. From now on, Ken, if we've got two former players who played together, we have to give like a 5-minute thing where that we don't get rid of the first guest. We bring them both on and just let them wax poetic, because John did a really good job of talking about James and what made him so special. And it would have been great to hear James' take on John. That would have been good stuff. James just exudes passion and happiness. Yeah. What a positive person. I mean, the entire time I was listening to him, I was thinking, imagine being coached by this guy, how good you would feel. And you're talking about the culture aspect of it. A guy could write a book on culture. I mean, every single thing he said, he's one of those coaches that everything he says is the right move to do, and it seems so simple, and yet it seems so hard for everyone else to do when they're trying to develop that culture. And then the last thing he just touched on, that was an interesting story, him going to Buffalo for 1 year and then going to play there for 6. I'll say this, a good buddy of mine, one of the reasons I'm into hockey as much as I am and talking hockey is my best friend in high school, Kyle Berchansky, was just a diehard hockey guy. He's that guy. He was knew all the stats. So I got into talking hockey because we were best buddies, and then that's what he liked to talk about. So we talk hockey. But I remember back in the day, he would always bring up James Patrick and talk about the fact that, James Patrick still going. It was like every year, it was like the clock would come around and it was James Patrick Day, where he'd talk about James Patrick and how James Patrick, looks like he's going to retire, but every time he comes back and he's still just as good as he is. It's kind of automatic. And it was funny he brought that up, because when he said that, it was so interesting to hear him talk about it and then think at that time and place, me and my buddy were sitting there talking about him and his career, and my buddy was saying the exact same thing. It's funny to hear that James was thinking it one and done, and then it just kept going and going and going. And I remember my friend telling me about him just going and going and going like that, and being such a good player the entire time. Well, it was fun to catch up with that.
And that's the whole thing about culture. I mean, that's one of those things where the management teams are probably saying, "Oh, can we get younger this year? No, let's bring back James." It's just one of those things where you think, maybe we can go with a younger guy. Well, no, you don't just miss the 12 to 14 minutes of ice time. It's everything that you do, the energy that you bring to the rink, the positivity, and the professionalism, right? So you don't just get that from a first-year pro or a second-year pro. I mean, James was an established pro for a reason. But he was also a highly touted player, a first round. This is a guy that's a top 10 draft pick. Yeah. But he also had the work. You don't just get by on skill to play as many years as James Patrick did in the National Hockey League. He's an incredibly smart teacher. He had big impact on coaching staffs in the NHL as an assistant, and as Jeff Kabilas just wrote in the chat room, James Patrick's going to be coaching in the NHL one day, and whenever that day is will be when James Patrick wants to coach in the National Hockey League. But right now, he's very focused on trying to help the Winnipeg Ice do something special, and they'll begin that process on Friday night.
I cannot wait until that day comes. Last thing, the image of 3 future NHLers just out on the street in Winnipeg playing. How awesome is that? That's so cool. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We really do appreciate that. I'm excited. I got to say, as Kenny teed up the show, we'll be there tomorrow and ready to watch the game. That's going to be a lot of fun. We're looking forward to it. We hope you all join us to talk a little bit about the ice. I know everyone loves Sammy Cosentino, so he'll be back, like Ken said. We just really appreciate you chipping in. Don't forget, everybody, that tonight we will have our regular Kenny and Renny post game after the Winnipeg Jets play the Carolina Hurricanes. We're looking forward to that. I'm at the stage, Kenny, I'm just embracing all the time we get to spend together and with the chat room and with our great guests while the season is going. So let's keep it going. Let's keep enjoying ourselves, and let's see you all tonight. Thanks for joining us, everybody.